Good afternoon. I'm Jason Craig. I'm the interim dean at the College of Law, and I'd like to welcome you to the 19th annual Darrell K. Soll Memorial Lecture in Criminal Law and Justice. This series is continuing expression of the R esteem for one of our own, the 1992 graduate at the College of Law, Darrell K. Soll. Darrell was an outstanding student, a thoughtful colleague, a skilled and passionate lawyer, and a committed teacher. He was named after the great Clarence Darrow, and not surprisingly, he was quick to take up the underdog's cause throughout his life. He was passionate both about fairness, equality, justice, and his passion and pursuit of justice helped him build a reputation for excellence in criminal defense. Shortly after Darrell passed, Jennifer Woods, another graduate of the College of Law, and Darrell's close friend, led an effort to establish this enduring tribute in his name, reflecting on his ideals, giving all of us a chance to know a little bit more about what was important to Darrell. Jennifer's work kept her in here with us today, but I wanted to thank her for her commitment and the opportunity to continue to celebrate Darrell's life here at the college. We should also acknowledge that this lecture complements our program in criminal law and policy, which couldn't happen without two wonderful fellows here in the front row. Peter and Jocelyn, thank you for your help throughout the year. I appreciate it. We have a special guest here today, another graduate of ours.
To Larry, obviously.
Yeah. Our county attorney, Laura Conover, who gave this lecture 5 years ago, just before starting her career as a prosecutor. She's going to introduce our speaker, but I just wanted to say a couple of words before that. Larry's been the elected district attorney in Philadelphia for 7 years. Before that, he had a 3-decade-long career doing civil rights and criminal defense work. And many of you have heard me say that I hope our most thoughtful and smart graduates consider working in prosecutors' offices throughout the country. And I say this because prosecutors have immense power and immense discretion, perhaps more than any other player in the system. Part of what we will hear today is what can happen when the person with that power and with that discretion has had a varied background before assuming and being elected to lead a prosecutor's office. And more importantly, what can happen when the person with that power and that discretion has both a vision for how the criminal legal system can be reformed and be improved, and more importantly, the strength to pursue that vision, even when other people are trying to stop those efforts. So with that, I want to introduce our county attorney and a past Soll lecturer, Laura Conover, who will introduce our speaker and then turn it over to Larry. We will end at 1:15. I know there will be opportunities for Q&A after Larry gives his remarks. Laura.
Thank you so much, Dean Craig. And may I just say that having been here on the campus in the weeks even before you arrived, we knew it was going to be a phenomenal thing for the law school to have you here, and it's lovely to see you in this new yet expanded role. Yes, it is true that 5 years ago on this date, I was asked and reluctantly accepted the opportunity to deliver the Soll lecture. I didn't feel worthy at that time. I still don't, and probably won't ever. But I'll say a thing that I said 5 years ago because it bears repeating. I didn't get to meet Darrell Soll personally. He was just a little bit ahead of my time when his young life was cut tragically short. But when I did arrive as a young, brand new public defender, all of my dear, most special mentors, all the cool kids, and I'm trying not to look at Jim Fullen, who's running, who is our legal defender for the office, because he was one of such people. They all were still grieving his loss viscerally, and they were still carrying his memory like a torch into court day after day. And by gathering here today, again, in his name, we honor him and his family for his dedication to the rule of law and to his clients. And that's an honor we should be proud of. Speaking of mentors, when I decided to run for Pima County Attorney in 2019, I was obviously having a midlife crisis, and also was deeply inspired and affected in a contagious way by those across the nation in huge population centers who were so brave and so courageous. They were thought leaders. I'm thinking of four in particular, and Larry Krasner was one of them. He was asking all the right questions and then laying out policies to effectuate them. Shouldn't our prosecutorial practices be data-driven rather than gut-driven? Shouldn't we study ancient philosophies of restorative justice to lean into the actual root causes of crime? Should we not treat children as children, and where we can keep them out of the adult carceral system? These questions and so many more. And never could I have dreamed or imagined that I would get to meet Larry, having become elected, and he would become a mentor so generous with his own personal time, his policies, his subject matter experts, so that I could try to do a little of what he's doing. I need to warn you now that Larry is here to deliver this lecture, but he's also here to unabashedly recruit our law school. It's true, Larry. And I'm here to tell you that I welcome it. Our philosophy at the Pima County Attorney's Office is you have to be a good attorney, but you have to be a great human being, because much is required from someone who is asked to hold such power in their hands. The power of a prosecutor must be held with caution. It must be respected. It is sacred. I learned that from Larry, and I'm trying to employ that at home. And so if you are called to be a prosecutor and to hold that power in your hand for the good and the health and the safety of your community, and you want to come work for us, that's great. Or Larry in Philadelphia, that's also fantastic. Or Larry, help me out, Denver, Seattle, Atlanta, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Ann Arbor. Did I say Denver? I don't know. Contra Costa. We're all over the place, and making waves. And it is with my great, great honor to welcome my friend and mentor and colleague, Larry Krasner.
That didn't give me way too much credit, but okay. All right, so I'm gonna talk for a little while. I usually talk too long, so at 12:45, that's gonna ring, and then I'm gonna stop. We're gonna go to Q&A. I hope you'll start plotting right now some zippy questions. I understand Tucson is full of nice people. Philadelphia has some of them. But I do want you to ask the thing that is burning, thing that makes you doubt, the thing that you think is challenging about what I'm saying. Because I think that is, in many ways, it's the Q&A that is a better way of conveying the information and having a group conversation from people who want things to be better. In many ways, that's the best way to do it. Let me start with the fundamentals. The title here is The Future of Criminal Justice Reform. So in order to talk about that, I think we need to talk about some fundamentals. When I won, I had been a criminal defense attorney for 30 years. I had been a civil rights attorney, mostly specializing in going after police officers who were otherwise unaccountable with Section 1983 litigation, when they framed people or killed them or beat them up or did other bad stuff. I mean, I guess you could say in a sense that was a kind of prosecution, because the Philadelphia DA's office at that time was maybe on the bad end of a spectrum of traditional prosecutors' offices that were not great. They often viewed themselves or applied a caste system in which certain people were treated better. And I'm sure you know Brian Stevenson's quote on that one. which is that it's better to be a rich, guilty person than a broke, innocent one. Well, he's not wrong about that, but it's not just wealth, it's some other things like fame, connections, whether you're a member of a particular tribe that happens to have the power, etc. When I was sworn in, as someone who never really wanted to run for anything and found myself in this position, was having, I would say, a late midlife crisis. I was, because I'd spent 30 years working hard as a trial attorney in criminal court, sometimes in civil court. And even though I'd gotten good results, I'd gotten a lot of good outcomes for individuals, I had made no sweeping change. I had been a public defender for 5 years, and I'm delighted to see my public defender friends over here, 3 in the county, and Philadelphia is a trial-happy county. It's one of the most trial-happy counties in the country for criminal and civil. I have been a federal public defender for 2 years. Yes, I am. And so I'm looking back at that age, saying, what did I do? Because the fact is that I worked hard, my public defender friends worked hard, and the entire time I was doing what I was doing, mass incarceration was rising. Philadelphia, which was at that time the poorest of the 10 largest cities, was not safer. Not really. It was then and is now to some extent chronically violent. We were not safer. We were not freer as a consequence of the same old drumbeat. And that same old drumbeat was arrest more of them, charge them higher, give them longer sentences, put more of them away. Didn't work. It was obvious to me it didn't work. I'd spent over a year of my life in prisons and jails talking to people who were defendants about their lives. I've represented victims at times as well. Stuff didn't work. It was good for the ambitious politicians who wanted to use the DA, being a chief prosecutor, as a launch pad for their careers. Just to give you a hint, for those of you who know these names, Arlen Specter, former Senator Arlen Specter in his 30s was district attorney of Philadelphia County. And later he blessed us with Clarence Thomas, among other things. How about Ed Rendell? Ed Rendell in his 30s was the ambitious DA of Philadelphia County, became the mayor, became the governor, became BFFs with Bill Clinton, up until very recently, a compelling centrist presence in the Democratic Party in the United States. These were not necessarily people who loved the job, but they were people who wanted the next job. And sadly, that's part of the issue that we're dealing with. So came a moment when I'm getting sworn in to this odd thing, being an elected official, and I had to figure out at 6 o'clock in the morning what the hell I was going to say with my 2-minute speech. I went over the oath, and the oath of a prosecutor is essentially this. It is to uphold the Constitution and laws, local and federal, and it is to seek justice. That's a little amorphous, let's be honest. I mean, certainly it's the right ideal, it's the right aspiration, but what does it mean? So as I sat there looking at this oath, I was trying to figure out what could that mean. And I came up with 3 things. Now, before I tell you those 3 things, let me just tell you I'm in the middle of reading a book by Stephen King. That book is called On Writing. It's Stephen King about 25 years ago, talking about his life and his theory of how he write. And he has this rather interesting premise, which I'm going to try to apply to this talk about the future of criminal justice reform, which is that you're not planning a story exactly. What you're doing is excavating, like an archaeologist, something that already exists. You're trying to find your way with toothbrushes and dry paintbrushes and other things to what's already there, right? Well, I will tell you those 3 things, but I can tell you right now, in general, I still think they're not a bad start to where it is that criminal justice reform has gone in the last decade and where it is it might go. And those 3 things are to exercise power with restraint, to use your discretion in a way that has its roots dug deep in equality, equality being the fundamental notion of American democracy. And one other, they'll come to me in a minute. But anyway, I'll check. But at any rate, it was those 2. So if you start with that and you think about that for a moment, how do we go from here? Where do we go from here? We certainly need to look at where we've been. When I took office in 2018, it was a whole bunch of blah, blah, blah. You don't know what you're doing just because you were in courtrooms trying incredibly serious and not so serious cases 5 days a week for 30 years. You don't know what you're doing. You're going to cause a zombie invasion. All your policies are nuts. Never mind that America is very unsafe and very unfree. You're going to be a disaster. You're going to cause a zombie invasion, et cetera, et cetera. Didn't happen. And then as I recruited, because we decided early on that probably the most important thing we could do for the future of criminal justice reform was to bring the right people in. I came into an office that didn't have all the right people. It had some of the right people, but a lot of the people who were there didn't belong there. They did not have the fundamentals. They were not hardworking enough. They were not moral enough. They were not talented enough. You know, fundamentally, the ethical system that operated was utilitarianism. In other words, the end justifies the means. And that's a real problem because that ethical system is fundamentally opposed to a system of laws and constitutions, which are much more, to use a fancy word, along the lines of deontological ethical system, one where you follow the rules, even if you don't feel like it, one where you follow the process that is supposed to be due, even if you don't feel it, right? So we are in a different point now. I can tell you that among the achievements in our efforts to make the city safer and to make it freer is that we will, and I won't get real deep into it, ask me more if you want, but we will probably set the record this year for the lowest number of homicides in over 50 years. We already, I believe, have set the record for the smallest number of people in county custody in my entire career, which is 37 years. And I'm talking, we've reduced that population by almost 2/3. When you start looking at some of the other things that we have done, because jail populations tell you a little bit, but they don't tell you enough. The future years of incarceration that are being generated in the Philadelphia courts right now, as compared to prior administrations, have been cut in half. The future years of supervision on probation and parole in a county that was supervision happy and not in a good way. Contrary to criminology, supervision years cut by 2/3, juveniles in jail-like settings cut by 70%. Exonerations. I know there are people here who teach and have worked very heavily in the area of exonerations, in the area of innocence. In 2024, we have 15 exonerations. It was 10% of all the exonerations in the United States coming out of one county. We have had almost 50 exonerations. And if you can contrast that with what happened for decades prior in Philly, the culture was to defend the conviction at all costs. The culture, and this should drop your jaw, was to oppose any inmate who wants DNA redone 10, 20, 30 years later with advances in DNA. There were people in jail that said, I'm still innocent. Can you test it again? And the DA's office would spend years fighting against that. How about this one? They had an unwritten but understood policy in the law division, which in our office of 700 is about 60 lawyers. The policy was, because there were so many violations of Brady, the name of the US Supreme Court that obliges prosecutors to give the defense stuff that helps them. There were so many of these violations that the policy in essence was, tell the judge you didn't find it. If we're at post-conviction, someone is claiming they should have gotten some stuff, tell the judge you didn't find it. What they didn't state is don't look. And I'm not making this up. We have transcripts of post-trial prosecutors on the record, years after convictions, saying, I didn't see it. Well, that'll happen when you don't look. Well, these are actually real changes. It's also a real change when your state prison population coming out of Philly goes from 13,000 to 9,000. It's also a real change when the resentencings for juvenile lifers under your administration, our administration, as compared to the prior administration, is on average 10 years shorter. And yet those juvenile lifers who were paroled are actually safer than, no offense to you, Because if you compare them to the general population, they are less likely to commit crimes and be arrested after parole, despite having been involved in homicides as juvenile, than a random sample of the general population. There is no honest way to look at that and say nothing has been achieved. Now, having said that, I am not going to lie to you and say that we all by ourselves somehow got, homicide by the horns and put it on the ground. That's not real. We all know there are a layer of factor after factor after factor, most of them structural, societal, bigger than us that are part of it. But I also think that there are things that we have done that have been part of that improvement and part of that increase, not least of which is getting people out of jail who never needed to be there and reallocating those resources for prevention and for modern investigative techniques, heavy emphasis on forensics that on the one hand solve more serious crimes and on the other hand make sure innocent people don't pay the price for a guilty person this way, right? So we've had some real accomplishments. At least we can look at that and say it didn't cause that zombie invasion that everybody said was going to happen. So sorry, those of you on the right, who, by the way, seem very unhappy that we're safer, and especially unhappy that we're freer. Perhaps you've noticed this. We do have a president of the United States, I say that with regret, who is so upset that 2024 was the best year of public safety improvement in the United States, that he has to deny it at every single turn. And in many cities, including Philadelphia, where not only will we have those numbers that I quoted for homicides, but out of 18 different categories and subcategories of crime, 14 of them are going down again. So we may have an even better year this year. He's so unhappy with all of that, that apparently he finds it necessary to lie, say everything is worse. Does lying and saying terrible things about your own country, is that part of making it great again? Or does that harm your country? I'll let you figure that out. So where do we go, since we can point to certain accomplishments? And yes, these accomplishments have occurred in many, many other jurisdictions. There's great work being done, including exceptional work in Tucson, Arizona, by State Attorney Laura Conover. Where do we go from this point? Well, there's a big narrative out there that we're all losing and we're all out of office. That ain't true. Wesley Bell was the reform prosecutor for St. Louis County. Wesley Bell's in the U.S. House. I'm so sorry he got slammed. That's terrible. Kim Foxx was not defeated in the election. She chose not to run again. And don't be even a little bit surprised if she'd run for governor or senator down the road a little bit. Yes, we did suffer some losses in authoritarian times in the United States that are also authoritarian times all over the world. And that would be, for example, one of my favorite reform prosecutors, George Gascon, who was defeated in Los Angeles after one term, having served more than one term as the chief prosecutor in San Francisco after an entire career as a police officer and a police chief in Mesa, Arizona, and in San Francisco, California. People forget that. Oh, these terrible liberals who are career cops. So, yeah, there have been some months in a row. There have been some losses, but there's a long list that I can go through. You heard much of it. And there are smaller jurisdictions, two in Virginia, Parisa Degani Taft in Virginia, Steve Descano in Virginia. What about Sarah George in Chittenden County, Vermont, that metropolis? There are more reform prosecutors who are out there. You're just not going to hear all about them from that likes the narrative that reform prosecution is over. Another fundamental I think you should know, and I truly believe this is it. We, reform prosecutors, do not have a problem with voters in general. We do not have a problem with outsiders in general. We have a big problem with insiders and insider institutions. And that means entertainment. That means journalism. That means mainstream political parties, where we are. I have, by the way, despite winning by large margins, never been endorsed by the Philadelphia Democratic Party, by the person who runs the party who used to ride the train to Joe Biden. Okay, never been endorsed. Why is that? I'm the incumbent. What's going on? I'm winning like 2-1 in some of these elections. Well, as I said, we don't have a problem. It's like looking through a dirty window pane. There's people out there and they're with us. And the dirty window pane is all the institutions, the electeds, the insiders who have benefited from the status quo financially in terms of their power and in other ways. It is no overstatement to say that the American public has largely been brainwashed for a very long time to believe that a maximalist approach to incarceration of human beings would make us safer when that was not true. And if you have questions on that, I recommend to you a book by an economist and law professor named John Fath. That's P-F-A-F-F. It is called Locked In, not to be confused with another great book, Locking Up Our Home, called Locked In. He devotes an entire chapter to a 30-year period in which crime was going down and down and down and down and down. And when the American public was polled over all those years, 65% of them every single year said it's going up. Okay, how'd that happen? Too much law and order. That's awesome. It's a TV show. That's what I'm talking about. Too much what bleeds leads in our journalism without contextualizing it in terms of data and criminology. Too many ambitious politicians using crime as coded language about their actual racist appeal to voters. That's how we got here. And that's how you have a country that I view as being pretty intelligent, having done stuff for decades that's pretty stupid. That's kind of how we got there. But then again, the title of this talk is the future. And how do we get there? So it is not the case that we are always right. We have come up with a lot of policies that upon closer examination appear to be functioning well. They either make us safer, or they make us freer, or they make us both of those things at the same time. All of those things, if you can advance, and I would hope that that's the highest calling of a prosecutor, to avoid the next victimization, to make us safer, but to support prevention, to make us safer, to support treatment and rehabilitation, to make us safer, and therefore to be able to have fewer people in jail and more resources for the things that actually prevent crime. But where do we go from here? So at almost 8 years in, I can tell you that of our 700 people in the DA's office, a city of 1.6 million, of those 700 people, we have about 320 attorneys. This administration has hired probably close to 280 of them. There's probably nothing that is going to make a bigger difference than that. And therefore, it really matters that we hang in there and try to bring in people who are super hardworking, very talented, and have an intact moral compass, who want to do individual justice with every case, who understand that what's happening in the courtroom is essential, but what's happening as a result outside of that courtroom throughout the entire jurisdiction is also an essential part of that equation. What can we do better? Well, we can continue, so long as the data supports it, to decarcerate. We can continue, so long as the data and the science supports it, to invest in prevention. We can continue to try to get legislatures to do intelligent things, like reinvestment legislation that says when you lower the population in custody and it saves taxpayers $60,000 a year per inmate, when you lower that, some or all, I mean, all would be nice, but let's just try for some. Half of that money has to be reinvested in prevention. It has to be reinvested in advanced forensics, in treatment and rehabilitation, in improvement of our, frankly, generally horrific system of prisons and jails. That's where the money has to go, not to one more tax break for Elon Musk.
I love that.
Anyway, don't get me started, but maybe we could do it. We could also be honest about this. Not every defense lawyer is that good. I was one. I actually went and visited people in jail, and not the day before the trial, 2 years after the arrest. I went and visited them in jail, because if you don't get that video at the quote poppy store, unquote, as they say in Philly, that shows that the guy was in the store instead of killing Mike across town, if you don't get it within 2 weeks, it gets erased. Well, defense attorneys need to do their jobs, and prosecutors need to do their jobs. Yes, prosecutors have a lot more power, but they need to do their jobs. and they are for the most part, and this is really true on the defense side and the prosecutorial side, unaccountable. That's real. They're largely unaccountable. So why we got so many immunities? We should get rid of some of those immunities. We should have, and this is a suggestion coming from your dean, we should have during a guilty plea colloquy, or during the colloquy that is done before a jury trial or before a bench trial, we should have the status of this defense attorney and this prosecutor. They should be signing or making an oath on the prosecutorial side that they've turned over everything to which the defense is entitled. On the defense side, there should be clarity that there has been timely and complete preparation on behalf of this defendant, and it should be sworn because they should be accountable for it. We're going to go to questions in just 1 second, but if you want to know how bad it gets, there is one ex-prosecutor in Philadelphia who I would like to put in jail. Maybe more than one, but he's special. This is someone who is now associated with 4 exonerations himself. In one of those exonerations, it was a homicide case, he was a homicide prosecutor. In one of those exonerations, he had 15 different statements about the killing. He provided 3 to the defense. They were the 3 that supported his theory. The other 12 included statements to the, at the extreme, statements to the effect of, oh, it definitely wasn't him. Him being the defendant. Didn't turn that one over. And there were plenty of other ones that were very, very useful to the defense. That ain't nothing but a pay the kidnappings. That's all that is. You're not going to give the defense any of the stuff that the United States Constitution very, very clearly says they are entitled to have. And then you're going to hide behind the statute of limitations when that person gets out of jail 25, 30 years later and say, you can't give me, it's been too many years. How did we create that system? You don't do that with kidnappers. You kidnap somebody for 20 years and we find that poor victim in a trailer in the back of your house. We don't say, oh, you kidnapped them a long time ago. We can't prosecute you. So there has to be that accountability. All right, I have a lot more to say, but it's Q&A time, and the dean is going to help me. Am I correct in that regard?
Happy to. Yeah. So Larry is willing to take questions from any angle, and he's going to answer whichever question he wants. But no, I do think it's all over. So, any range from what it's like to. All right, we're going to get started.
Good.
Good.
Well, I'll go already. I have more questions,
Yes.
many more. Be all day. But you talked a lot about science, forensics, etc. There's been a replication crisis both in soft sciences and in the forensic sciences. So how does your office actually separate the wheat from the chaff? This is good science. This actually helps us. This is bad science. This could lead to a public order problem.
Well, at our best, we have some of the best experts around. For this time, we employed a woman named Carrie Wood, who is now actually in charge of forensic science for the Public Defender Service in the entire state of New Jersey. But, we have people who are honest, who believe in justice, and who are not simply going to say that bite mark science is good, or that arson science is good, but it's not. And we try our best to, to get that under control. As I'm sure you know, if you follow this, sometimes a bumpy road, fingerprints for a whole lot of time, and then doubts about fingerprints, and then a restoration to some extent of faith in fingerprints. So it's something that is very important. We do have people in the office, they might not be quite as expert as she was, but I'm perfectly willing to hire experts to talk about other techniques. The last thing I want is somebody doing a bunch of time on phony baloney forensics, whether it's, tire marks or shoe prints or all the ones that usually come up on that list.
You mentioned the Democratic Party not endorsing you, and then I'm also vaguely familiar with the phony impeachment attempts in the Pennsylvania legislature.
That was a real impeachment. Right.
What are some of the most significant limitations or obstacles that the state of Pennsylvania or state Democratic actors have imposed on your ability to enact the reforms that you want to enact?
Great question. It's like the last one. Well, I mean, it is kind of rude to get impeached, but on the other hand, I'm sort of proud because the impeachment never alleged, and they agreed with this, never alleged I committed a crime or did anything corrupt. It basically said, we can't vote in your jurisdiction, but we don't like what you're doing. We don't like your policies and your ideas. And in essence, the Pennsylvania appellate courts dithered for a while and then said, no, that's not impeachment. Like, hey, impeachment is for bad stuff. It's not for disagreement. So that makes me the only person in 342 years. And as I said, I'm a little bit proud. But that wasn't the question. The question was,
What are the most significant obstacles that impose
Right.
here?
okay, so, some of it's structural, but it does largely boil down to the legislature. So, for example, cash bail is a disaster. We, in my opinion, all over the country, and already in many ways in federal court, and currently in the District of Columbia, to some extent Kentucky, New Jersey, Illinois, they have no cash bail systems, which does not mean everybody gets out. It means that in DC, the data shows that about 12% of people charged with crimes are charged with heavy, scary stuff and or have heavy, scary records, often both. They don't get out until trial occurs. The other 88% can be broke as they want to be. They're going to get out. They might have to do a little sweat bail, meaning if you got here for reasons having to do with substance addiction, then maybe once a week you got to go check in at a particular center that can provide you help. If you're homeless, maybe there's some unhoused, I should say. Maybe there are some things that can provide for you. That is what the system should be. But it isn't in Pennsylvania because counties make a ton of money off people's bail, which they regularly snatch in pieces or in its entirety, either as a fee or for fines and costs. They're making a lot of money. And there's also private bail bonds and bonds person industry in Pennsylvania that's very profitable, where you pay less than the full bail, but Doug the bounty hunter gets to keep it for good. So those people are lobbyists and they knock on the doors of legislators, some of whom didn't make it out of high school, just so we're clear. Many of them didn't go to law school, just so we're clear. And they're writing laws on these topics. That's a problem. There's too much profit that's being made at these different levels in that. Another big issue, of course, is this. And this is why the legislature does what it does. Pennsylvania used to have coal, it used to have steel. These used to support a lot of counties, including ones with names like Carbon County. Yes, we have a Carbon County. Pennsylvania, well, they don't have that anymore. And they replaced it with prisons. Those jurisdictions are going to get about $60,000 of taxpayer money a year per inmate. That is going to be a major employer. It is going to be a major consumer when it comes to food, and to other goods. It's going to make sure the diner stays open, the tax base is okay, the public school stays open. So what do you think those legislators who make 90 grand and only have to be in Harrisburg 60 days a year, what do you think those legislators are going to do when it comes time to decide, should we make this a first degree felony? Should we have a mandatory sentence that requires a certain number of years? This is what they do. They say, we ain't Pittsburgh, we ain't Philly, but we'll take the people and we'll put them in our jails. You go to some of these counties, and as I said, I did this for 30 years. The docket of criminal matters is DUI, hunting violations, and assaults of guards in prison. That's their docket. So what are they going to do? They're going to decide that anything that happens in Philly and Pittsburgh deserves a maximal sentence. They're going to set up a conveyor belt from Philadelphia and Pittsburgh to try to fill their cells with those people. Those people, after all, don't actually look exactly like their voters. So their voters are not offended by this carceral approach because it doesn't really apply to their voters, right? It is nothing more and nothing less than a commerce in human bodies that benefits them and a rip off of taxpayers for things that do not improve taxpayer safety. And it gets even a little worse because up until recently, wherever you resided as an inmate was your county of residence. Think about that. County of residence for highway funds, county of residence for political power. So what rural Republican wouldn't want to incarcerate the entire city of Philadelphia and their county for all that power and all that money? I mean, I don't know how we then have a logical, persuasive conversation with my friends on the other side of the aisle about this, when the incentives are set up in that fashion. So, that's some of it. It would be simplistic to say they just hate us, even though it feels like that sometimes. They hate the big city, they hate the people who live there in the city that Philadelphia is 40% white. Okay, that's simplistic. I think the reality is that they have a whole bunch of incentives and structural reasons to want to perpetuate a system that is very destructive.
There,
I just want to, for those who are skeptical about Carbon County, I just want to tell you, I have a prison call set up for later this week with a state correctional institution, Cole Township.
There you go.
So the prison is literally named after the former industry. This is a pervasive problem across the top.
let me offer a follow-up question. You talked a lot about what the data show with respect to no cash bail. Our current president wants to involve himself in very local decisions that district attorneys or county attorneys make. And no matter what the data show, the person who has a very powerful voice right now who's saying, this is a disaster, and we can't have no cash bail, and we should do other things. So how do you can answer the specific one, or the general question is, when your approach has been to have your decisions informed by information, and there's someone else on the other side who has frankly a bigger bullhorn than you do, how do you counter that?
Great question, with facts and truth. I know, that's kryptonite for him, but fact and truth. So under the law, we could not somehow make Philadelphia County a cashless bail system because it's written into the Constitution, the laws, et cetera. But what we could do was we could make recommendations to the bail commissioners, because needless to say, the DA doesn't set the bail, we just advocate. That only went two ways, very high bail and no bail. And early on, 45 days in, we came up with 25 different offenses that were, generally speaking, minor offenses on violence, where we were gonna have a policy of never asking for money for those, right? Studied that and then, longer story, but we also had a much higher level that we would request when we thought that someone was truly a danger to society, et cetera. So we studied it about a year later, and so did independent criminologists, and determined that our 25 get out of jail without paying money offenses, that our approach there had not caused crime, and it had not caused people to fail to come to court. The same conclusion was reached internally by our criminologists, PhD criminologists, and our data team, and then we published a report, and we talked about it. I know, it's like a tug of war between truth and stupid. I will say this, if we talk about the future of criminal justice reform, it might be a really short future if we don't get this right. And I am remembering my oath, which is to uphold the constitutions and the laws of the United States, which go in the direction of things like democracy, stuff like that. Unfortunately, if I have to say now that my job really has two aspects. One of them is DA, is what you think. It is the prosecution, investigation, et cetera, of criminal activity. The other one is to defend democracy. Because that is my oath. It is to uphold the Constitution and the laws. So that means that there may come a time when Philadelphia is invaded by federal agents of one sort or another. And however offensive I find that, I'm not going to do anything about being offended. But if they commit crimes, my oath is pretty clear. It is to have them arrested and prosecuted for crimes. Yes, I know some things will come after that, but that is my oath. And it's something we haven't hesitated to do for that small number of police officers who've committed crimes, including really serious ones, in Philadelphia. We have police officers sitting in jail right now for murder, for homicide, for perjury, for serial rape, among other things, right? Well, there's something special about an ICE uniform. There's something special about an FBI uniform. You come to Philly, if you murder people, you should be prosecuted for that. But we have a bigger obligation. It's also to defend elections. It's also to make sure that democracy, which is part and parcel of the Constitution, is not eliminated. So I will say this, I think the future of criminal justice reform is either going to be very short or it's going to be very long, but at this moment in time, it has to fully embrace the defense of democracy as being half the job. And the other half of the job is everything we've talked about.
Yeah, front row.
So like one of the big ideas in the federal rules of evidence is that you can't use past acts to prove someone has like a propensity for crime. But the big exception is sexual, yeah. Thank you, Professor.
Pretty impressive, but anyway.
Right, but the big exception is with the sexual assaults and like crimes against children, the child molestation, and so I'm wondering how we should think about those, cause right, like I don't want people who like committed a bunch of sexual assaults to like get away with it, like the William Kennedy Smith guy, or like Bill Clinton. But at the same time, right, like somebody's past behavior doesn't mean they are guilty in this moment.
So, great question. You know, we don't practice in federal court for the most part. We do some federal habeas, but it's not where we are usually. I did have 25 years of doing federal criminal work, so I'm familiar with the differences between federal rules and Pennsylvania rules, which in general tend to be more protective of defendants than some of the others. A lot of these issues, at least in Pennsylvania, are going to come down to whether or not you're dealing with a signature crime. In other words, whether it's just pure prejudice to talk about how this person was convicted or accused of the same crime in the past, or whether there are details that are relevant. You know, if you're dealing with someone, and we have this case right now, by the way, if you're dealing with someone who tried to go after multiple victims, one of whom he raped and murdered, others whom he raped, others whom he attempted to rape. And he's always doing it on a purple bicycle with curved handlebars with white tape on it. And he is always saying the same things and trying to drag these victims down to water in a particular park. We are no longer just in the land of propensity, in my opinion. We are much more in the land of this is a signature crime. There are specific aspects of this that are relevant. Sure, there's parts of it that are prejudicial, but it's more probative than prejudicial, and therefore shouldn't be.
I love the fact that we're having a review of evidence. It's making me quite happy. You wanted to add to that?
I actually wanted to add, so my specific area of work at the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office is the Gun Violence Task Force, and we have individuals that are group affiliated and also gang affiliated. But it is very dangerous to assume that a person is just potentially affiliated with something and use that in a court of law and use it against that person. So in our kind of line of work, we work with grand juries where we kind of put in a lot of people to kind of present the evidence of what a group affiliation is and whether or not they deem it to be an actual gang that we can present that in court. So it's not just like you're making a blanket statement about someone and trying to use it against them in a court of law. And then on top of that, verifying that they have some type of participation in a group affiliation or a gang. So I think it's a really good question. And I think like you can handle it delicately in order to make sure that you like set appropriate standards for people.
I haven't looked this way, so I want to make sure. Oh, yeah, I was missing someone. Sorry, go ahead.
So in kind of relation to your, what you were talking about in terms of making sure that, criminal justice reform continues and doesn't kind of get cut off prematurely. I've also seen that you've kind of gone towards, not prosecuting on a lot of, drug possession charges. And I'm from Oregon, and recently we decriminalized, a lot of drug possession and then recriminalized it because that was so unsuccessful. And so I guess my question is, how do you continue with that aim of not having to incarcerate them for these minor drug possession charges, without going too far, and kind of, like, how do you protect that goal, in moving forward?
Understood. Let me just a side comment on Oregon. Like, there are different narratives on it. One of the narratives on that is basically we decriminalized it, and then the people who hated what we were doing made sure we had no resources to rehabilitate people. Yeah. And then they did what they do best, which is holler it's a failure after they made it a failure. I don't know if that's correct or not. I'm not from Oregon, but that is definitely what a lot of the advocates for that policy have to say at this point. We actually do something a little bit differently. And I am a student of what was done in Portugal, which might be the most successful rehabilitation program in the history of the world when it comes to heroin and opioids. We can talk about that. But we do something different. We will not charge possession of marijuana because that's nuts and because you can drive across the bridge and buy gummies in New Jersey. So, you know, we got better things to do than prosecute beer at the end of Prohibition. We also do not prosecute possession of buprenorphine, which is otherwise known as Suboxone. That is kind of an opioid, but it's really used primarily for people trying to get off of heroin, fentanyl, other opioids. And people who are unhoused, living on the street in addiction for years don't have medical coverage. So why am I going to spend my time on that? Can't we just solve some homicides and catch some serial rapists? Wouldn't that be a better thing to do? But for all the other ones, we actually do charge possession of drugs. And then we try to take those cases and make sure people get treatment and ideally not convict them. So and I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong, but it's what we've done. We try to use the pressure of that moment. You know, for some people who are in deep addiction, the moment of being locked up, the moment of being in a jail cell is a potential moment of reckoning. And if you can get them right then, when they're very low and they're thinking, I got to do something. And if you can get them into treatment, there's a relatively high success rate when you do that. It's a longer talk, but that's what we've been doing. And, you know, Caleb Arnold from my office will tell you we are at war with some of the judges who have a 30-year-old version of what drug treatment court looks like. Actually, don't. But anyway, we are kind of at war with them because it turns out 30-year-old cars don't need tune-ups, and you know, why would you change anything when it's been working so poorly? It's kind of where that is. But anyway, I hope that answers your question. Happy to talk to you more about it. Yes, Caleb Arnold.
Just want to add that we do divert like most of the drug users, regardless of whether their crime is a minor possession or whether they're selling. So it's a range of criminal activity, and the recidivism rate for people that successfully complete treatment through our programs is really low. And the people that can't access the program, either because they got arrested and they bench warranted or because we didn't offer them diversion, is really high. So we know that that intervention is really successful. So it's a way that we can increase community safety within the criminal legal system without creating a conviction at the end of it.
Do a public service announcement and we'll do some more stuff. So for any of you who are 1Ls, 2Ls, or 3Ls, we have robust summer programs for the 1s and 2s, and for the 3s, we hire about 50 lawyers a year. We have a lot of spots left. We came here for a reason. It's not just to talk to you. Enjoy that. To get you to work on her.
No.
Or in the event you'd like to come to a trial happy jurisdiction on the East Coast for at least 3 years, we would love to have you come to a trial happy jurisdiction on the East Coast. We are doing interviews from when to when?
1:30 to 4
Okay,
today and thereafter.
1:30 to 4, and then we have a class, and then after that,
We could pick back up at the local watering hole you recommend.
Yeah, okay, I think I can help. My intel is so old though, guys, so like maybe just come down and tell me things, but
Shout it down if
but
it's.
it's right, I mean, his operation dwarfs mine, right? Although 1.6 million, 350 attorneys, Jim's fine. 1.1 million, 61. That's life so hard. His operation is huge, And so I think General Ben's is like walkable or carpooling, and he's literally this gracious with his time. I got to have dinner last night with some of my people, Alex there. I got to meet Caleb and Fern and Sarah, who are equally amazing, the ADAs that travel to Philly. And you should, I'm being generous, you should go get this time with him, the law students, if you pick one.
Is that the right spot? Uncle Piss? or-
Gentlemen.
That's a right spot.
Gentlemen, I feel like it's walkable, but they're gonna tell, you guys are gonna know better.
Is that the right spot?
You'll tell us, you'll tell us.
Because I can't invite you when you leave, so. is
Yeah,
that the right spot?
this is what we'll do. For those of you who
Yeah.
haven't already signed up for an interview this afternoon, there are spots for that. Like, come down right after the talk and see me or Sarah or,
My phone number, you can
like,
text me,
we could coordinate this.
figure it out. Do
Or,
a chat.
or worst case scenario, like, you have to run to class right away. You all the interviews are upstairs or they're in the CDA? In the Sullivan room, so like, we're around, like, come knock on my door. We can make some connections, to at least get some time with folks while they're here. And I don't think you'll regret it. I think we have time for one more, question.
I guess my question is, you were talking about sort of all of the things that are happening outside of the courtroom. And when I'm thinking about criminal justice reform, I'm also thinking about like housing justice, food insecurity, and, ideal world of like a free census system or whatever it might be. And so I guess I'm curious how you and how your office sort of achieves all of these kind of holistic, tangential, but also inherently related issues.
Well, ideally, what you're talking about is the solution. Our budget taxpayer budget is 50 million. The city's budget is 6.8 billion. The mayor and city council have the ability to take enormous amounts of money to go after the underlying issues that are drivers of this stuff, and they need to do it. We're in this odd position where we can spend money like a drunken sailor, no offense to sailors, but we can spend money like a drunken sailor by saying 20 years, 1.3 million, 1.8 million. We can spend money like drunken sailors, but we can't really, when we don't do that, when we decide it's not 20, it's 10, it's not 30, it's whatever, 12, but we can't redirect those funds. So, I don't view criminal justice reform as being just prosecutors or just sheriffs or just police chiefs, and there are forward-looking modern ones in all those categories or in corrections. I think it is also mayors and it's US senators and it's members of the US House who are going to take a more intelligent approach. By the way, you have in a very nice way pointed out exactly what it is that our president seems to be wanting to undermine. Can't get his crime the old-fashioned way. So why don't we make sure everybody starves? Why don't we make sure you can't get your insulin and you have to share it with somebody else? Why don't we make sure your public schools are not maintained? Why don't we gut all of these things that we know are preventative? And then guess what? When crime kicks up, it's time to roll tanks. That is part of what's going on. But I don't think I'm going to be mayor, so we're going to have to run somebody else.
I will add that we do address a lot of those issues within our very robust diversion system. So we do have access to treatment, job training, like all of these we try to connect people to the community organizations and systems that work. And then we do a lot of diversion programs that are go complete a connection with this program or this, organization. And if you successfully engage with them, we'll withdraw your case. So it's a way to kind of push people back into the community resources that do exist when they do come in contact with us.
Thank you. I want to say just a couple things to wrap up. But the first one I want to say is that some of you in this room saw someone who's an elected prosecutor in one of the biggest cities in the US and thought, I didn't know you could do this and be this way and be an elected prosecutor in one of the biggest cities or any of the cities in the US. And you can. There are a bunch of different ways to be a lawyer. You can be you. This is Larry. We just got this. This is Larry. And you can be in this position and have all this power and discretion. So what way you find the way to be the lawyer that you're going to be, you can just be you and find the way to that path as well. Even if that meant spending 30 years as a criminal defense attorney and then deciding to run for the office as the prosecutor in town as well. So I think that's a message that we should, me as dean, that's an important message for me, and I wanted to share that. I also wanted to say thank you to Larry and his team for coming out, for spending so much time with us. These are These are important messages to me, they're important messages to our community and for all of us who want to be prosecutors or going to be criminal defense attorneys. I'm very, very grateful for your time, grateful for your thoughts, and I'm grateful for your willingness to wait for lunch. For everyone's here, I apologize for that, but lunch is available and, grab something on the way out. Otherwise, thank you, everyone.